Yeah. We ready? Am I live? Hey, somebody, Laura, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Good, thank you. Well, today's Father's Day, and so that's what's on my mind. So I thought that's what we talk about. I have a couple verses. Maybe we'll start out with the verses, and then we'll build off of that. It's okay. It's okay. Maybe you could just let her know, yeah. Here's a verse from the 14th chapter. Krishna in the Gita says, Pita aham asya jagato mata. He says, I'm the mother and the father of the universe. So that statement's made in the 9th chapter. And then again in the 14th chapter, he says here, Mahama Yoni Mahat Brahma. The great Brahma, the great spirit, Mama Yoni, is my womb. The great spirit is my womb. Tasmin Garbam Dadam Yaham. And in it I place the seed. Sambhava Sarvabhutanam, that gives rise to all living beings. So Krishna here uses a sexual metaphor of male and female genitalia. Garbha means seed. It also means semen. And yoni means womb. So mama yoni means my womb. And garbham dadami means I place the seed, or I place semen. And then as a result of that, sambhava sarva bhutanam, all living beings, it gives rise to all living beings. So essentially Krishna's almost using a hermaphroditic metaphor where he's taking the place of both the masculine and the feminine, and he's speaking about the creation of all living beings in the same way that a child, a human child, for instance, is created by a male and a female. So he's also saying that he is both the masculine and the feminine. It's the same idea that I'm the mother and the father of the universe, but it's more explicit. It's more explicit. And in the subsequent verse, he says, Sarva yoni shukaunteya murtaya sambhavantyaha tasam brahma mahat yoni aham bija pradapita. I am the seed-giving father. Aham bija pradapita. I am the seed-giving father. He literally says that. Yeah. So he uses here both masculine and feminine ideas. In case it wasn't explicit when he says, it's my womb and I place the seed in it, he then says, bija, seed, also is a synonym for semen in Sanskrit. And so, bija prada pitta, I am the seed-giving father. Literally is what Krishna says. Pitta means father in Sanskrit. So, aham bija prada pitaha, I'm the seed-giving father. Mama yoni, it's my womb. Tasmin garbam dadamyaham, in that womb I place my seed. And pitahamasya jagato, hey Howard, you're going crazy with your camera there. Either keep it steady or just black yourself out. Thank you. Dark yourself out. Pitahamasya jagato. I am the Mata. I'm the mother and the father of the universe. So these are statements from the Gita. I'm the mother and father of the universe. It's my womb. In my womb, I place the seed. I am the seed-giving father. All these statements occur in the Gita. Masculine and feminine motifs in order to describe God via positiva. So, I'm sorry, my concentration got disturbed. Krishna makes use of masculine and feminine motifs in the Gita. There is a tendency in spiritual discourse to neuter your description of God. And it's fairly reasonable to understand why this happens. We're in this world, we're in bodies, we're in the material world. The material world in many ways is defined by temporality. It's defined by entropy. And so when we think about spirituality, it's very common that we start to think via negativa. We don't say what God is, we say what God is not. Thomas Aquinas is famous for saying, he's a very famous Catholic theologian. He said you cannot say what God is, you can only say what God is not. This type of theology is sometimes called via negativa. You describe what something is not. You tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth is the negativa. You say what you don't do as much as what you do. You get a real exact definition. Don't do it this way. Do it this way. You describe something both positively as well as negatively. And in theological terms, it's called apophatic theology. You say what God is not. And the first instance of apophatic theology, interestingly, is in the Upanishads. And you find so much apophatic language in the Gita where it says, not apathetic, apophatic. Apophatic, A-P-O-P-H-A-T-I-C. Apophatic theology. And so in the Gita you find so much of this, so much via negativa philosophy and theology where you describe what God is not. Because God is not like anything in this world. And God is a singularity beyond this world. And God is transcendent, which is the opposite of immanent. Therefore, you won't find God in this world. You'll find God in that world. In some kind of some sort of a spastic way, this leads people to millenarianism where they want to die and create mass suicide, or they can't wait for the deluge or the flood, or they can't wait for the fire to come, or they can't wait for the apocalypse to come, or maybe they precipitate the apocalypse and with some kind of mass suicide, and it's that whole apocalyptic cult where people can't wait for the world to end is called millenarianism. And you find, with your Jim Jones and your Wacos and David Koresh and with certain Buddhist cults in Thailand, Cambodia, and in various Christian cults, kind of from the beginning, you find this phenomena going on. You got Buddhists who used to drink mercury and kind of almost like committing suicide. It's a thing that happens. People just can't wait for the apocalypse. So you find it nowadays. Anyway, you have a Heaven's Gate cult. People just commit suicide here in the 80s. They had their tennis shoes on and they took drugs and thought they were going to go back to heaven in a spaceship. There was a guy in Costa Mesa came up with that cult. He moved on to San Diego eventually. It was all over the news when I was a kid, teenager growing up. Those cults, they have their basis in this idea that you can't find God in this world. You got to go to that world. You can't find, spirituality in this world. This world is mammon, to use biblical language. And so you won't find spirit in mammon. That's what leads Jesus to say it's easier for to thread a camel through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich person to go back to heaven. That's a statement from the Bible. So that whole twisted version that we know as millenarianism, that we know as these sort of death cults, suicide cults, they do have their basis in a fairly standard idea of dualism. There's God and the devil, there's right and wrong, there's heaven and hell, there's this world and that world, and ultimately we have to go to that world in order to find any kind of happiness or joy or truth. And this world, in many ways, is like an accident or a problem. And there's really nothing good that will come out of it. This also led to like man's hatred of women and viewing women as being, bad. And this whole, kind of a fairly standard religious critique of women as temptresses who would pull men who were largely seen as the primary candidates for transcendence, and the women would pull men away from transcendence, and they were vilified. All of that, in a perverse manifestation, has its root in this idea that this world is bad. Everything in this world is bad. So, following in the footsteps of this, in perhaps a less disturbing way, is this tendency to neuter God and to think of God, well, I'm masculine or I'm feminine, and those things create problems in the world, and they're part of this world, which is temporary. And so everything in this world is temporary. And if I want to think about spirituality, I have to go beyond this world. And so I can't think of God in masculine terms or feminine terms. God is just it. To describe God as he or she is profane. It's to saddle the transcendent with these materialistic terms. And so the best thing you can do is describe God in completely neutered language and almost not say anything about God other than he's not this, not that, not the other thing. And we can describe God as the great it. You find this exact type of theology for its first instance on the planet in the Upanishads. It's not even like it's our thing. It's in our sacred texts. Tat Brahma, that Brahman. Brahman is described in the third person as an it, or in the third, neuter gender, as an it. And Brahman isn't etat, it's not this, it's that. It's far away. This means close by, either in time or in space. That, in English, means far away. You want this book? No, I don't want this book. I want that book. Oh, that book over there? Yeah, that book. Not this book. No. Do you want to come at this time? No, I want to come at this time. I want to come at that time. At some other time. You follow? So Brahman is described in distance, that Brahman, in a neuter gender as an it. I think there's value in that because we have a tendency to anthropomorphize everything and think of everything in human terms. And so I think it's valuable to chasten ourselves by speaking about God in a way that forces us to realize that God is transcendent, that God is beyond this world, that God is more than just like the people in this world. When we say God's a father, it gets dangerous and dicey because your father may be a louse, or he may have abandoned you, or he may have mistreated you in some way. And if you describe God as mother, mothers can also be abusive and terrible in many ways. And so you just start to describe God in masculine and feminine terms, or in parental terms, matriarchal and patriarchal terms, then you end up with, you start to think, well, God's like my mother was horrible to me, or God's like my father was terrible to me. And you end up with this really crippled notion of divinity. And so a lot of times, the best thing you can do is to sever God from that, describe God in abstract terms and via negativa terms. There are limits to this. I mean, we came from that. And so this, in some ways, has to resemble that. You look at a child and you understand something of the parents. Masculinity and femininity, male and female, exists all over the world. In every species, by and large. Like even in flora, what to speak of in fauna, even in flora, it's the standard. There's some self-replicating genes and some hermaphroditic organisms, but for most of the floral and the fauna categories, plant and animals, you have both male and female. It seems to be the order of the day. And when you look at this creation, you see these things exist. And so they had to have come from that. And so that must contain some of this. Otherwise, where did this world come from? And where did masculine and feminine come from? If not from God. If everything came from God, then those things also came. When you look at the result, you find that the cause is present in the effect. You find that causes leads to effects, and those causes possess those effects in some incipient seed-like form, and those effects get played out. But when you look at a child, you see in that child's gene structure, they represent their derivative of their parents. And to try to say the child has nothing whatsoever to do with the parents is foolish. It's unreasonable. So if God created this world, if this world came from that world, if God gave rise to this world, if we are of God, if we come from God, if God's the source of everything, then God's also the source of masculinity and femininity, in which case it shouldn't be wholly wrong to use these terms to describe God. And in fact, there are many positive ways we can use these terms to describe God. Mothers are nurturing. Fathers are protective. There are many really nice lessons you can get out of looking at God as masculine and feminine, provided you don't understand that God is not merely masculine or feminine. Provided you understand that God is both immanent and transcendent. That you find reminiscence of the God in this world, but that God is also beyond this world. If you find things that are reminiscent of God, or things that are indicative of God, things that lead you to God in this world, and then also God goes beyond the mere totality of what's going on in this world. And so you have a concept of both immanence, this, and transcendence, that. And there's an idea that makes sense. There's an idea that makes sense, that's workable. And the Gita amazingly uses both neutered language to describe the absolute as well as masculine and feminine language. And not just masculine, that's another thing we do sometimes. If we do sexualize God, then God's male and he's white and he's old and things like that. But you find Krishna being described as the smallest of the small and the mother of the universe. And even the word Krishna means black. So you get this subversive notion of God, where God is described as being black and white, of being everywhere and nowhere, of being in all things and beyond all things, of being immanent and transcendent, of being bigger than the biggest and smaller than the smallest, of being the youngest and most fresh, and also the oldest and most wise simultaneously. And you get this challenge to the tendency we have to make things dualistic and say it's either this or that and create a dichotomy. It's got to be one or the other. And you find the Gita regularly subverting that notion and refusing to buy in to that limited conception. And God is described in both masculine and feminine terms, as greater than the greatest and smaller than the smallest, as the oldest and the youngest, as black and white. And you find this healthy conception of God that transcends the dualism of this world without getting rid of it by actually owning that God is the source of both things. Therefore, God must be the most masculine and the most feminine. Even Krishna Balaram are depicted as white and black, side by side, a perfect union. Even our conception of Chaitanya is a masculine and feminine conception of divinity. A truly androgynous deity. Radharani's sentiments with Krishna's form. There's a lot of, I think that, and this happened in I don't know, it kind of happened in third wave feminism, in certain elements of third wave or second wave feminism, depending on how you want to define it. You began to have things like lipstick feminism and black feminism and Mexican feminism, where people said, hey, I'm a woman, but I'm not a woman like some white lady in her 40s with a shaved head. It tells me what it means to be a woman. And if I want to wear lipstick and high heels and be a woman, I can do that. And if I want to be a traditional housewife and be a homemaker and be a woman and be fully empowered, I can do that also. And if there's a Mexican flavor to my feminism, that's okay too. And if there's a black flavor to my feminism, that's okay too. And if I want to be empowered to define myself and not be defined by a patriarchal society, I'm also free to define myself, free from a bunch of white rich women telling me what it means to be a woman. An element of that third wave feminism was also that people start saying, hey, I want to celebrate my femininity. I want to live with gender norms. I want to live with, traditional roles where my husband is the breadwinner and I'm the homemaker and we get along. And I like the Leave It to Beaver idealized household of the 40s and 50s. I enjoy that. I want that for myself. I aspire for that. I think there's some value in that. That's attractive to me. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that fully empowered, not because I'm forced to, but because I want to. Not because I have no other options, but because that's what I choose for myself. And in this empowered third wave of feminism, or an element of the third wave of feminism, you find, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that there's something special that it means to be a man. Men in a place like Norway. Anyway, I could get into this in a great detail. I get into this in great detail, but I think maybe I'm going to pivot a little bit. I think there's a lot of value in seeing God as your father. I think there's a lot of value for people who enjoy traditional roles for men and women. I think there's a lot of value in them. I think you find those roles reflected in nature, which is indicative that they're quite natural. And therefore, I think there's value in recognizing them and allowing for them and understanding them. And instead of considering a neutered absolute and a neutered conception of divinity to automatically be the best, I think an even more sophisticated and more evolved, really, conception of divinity is where you can hold both masculine and feminine conceptions in tension with one another and honor them both. And I actually think that's a more informed way to live. I think it's a more informed way to live in this world as well. I think it's a more powerful way to live in this world and to view your fellow men and women in this world. There may be ways in which men are, as a sex, are gifted. Men may be stronger than women in terms of brute strength. Men have been shown to be better at math than women in almost every test ever conducted. Like global tests. Obviously not every man is smarter than every woman in math. Women are better at language than men are. Women are better at learning language than men. Women are better naturally, without training it, at reading micro-expressions in faces than men are. Even in countries with really rigorous feminist agendas that are just trying to flatten the curve and make men and women equal in every single way, you find that 90% of the engineers in those such countries are men and 90% of nurses are women. It's vexing to governments that have embraced as an axiomatic truth that men and women are equal in all respects. They're not. We have to have male and female Olympics. They attempted to put men and they had this idea, let's just make at least one sport. They came up with curling, which is like, essentially it's like lawn bowling or like pool on like grass. It's like it's the women Olympic team could not compete with the men's Olympic team at all. Even when it came to a sport like that, it wasn't based on brute strength. And so to have women and men's sports, to have women and men's Olympics, and not just throw everybody, have women and men's prisons, and not just throw everybody in the same boat together, makes a lot of sense. And to think it doesn't make sense, it should just be obstinately and willfully stupefied. And so I think the Gita, in a lot of ways, is a cutting-edge literature that goes beyond our sensibility that a neutered absolute is automatically better. And Krishna goes big and says he's the seed-giving father and the womb that seed is put into. And he's the mother and father, and he speaks in language which is very nurturing and also very protective. And he's very just and also merciful. Even the concept of justice and mercy are very much masculine and feminine ideals put together. Even in the Christian God, they have to eventually see it as being representative of both of these qualities. And so instead of throwing away the baby with the bathwater, we should learn to, in a non-exploitative way, in a healthy way, appreciate the fine qualities that women have and the fine qualities that men have in this world. And we should learn how to, in a way that doesn't saddle or cripple divinity, we should learn how to appreciate these qualities in the absolute. We should learn to appreciate the strength and the power and the justice and the protection of our Father. And we should also learn to appreciate nurturing and sweet and providing and protective qualities of Krishna as our mother. And instead of being ashamed of the sexed language and the sexual motifs in the Gita, which might make both Victorian people as well as New Age people cringe for different reasons. The New Age people would cringe because they can't stand. Hang on. Thank you. A friend of mine just texted me. And so you've got... what was I talking about? Yeah, Victorian people, right? It's like you can't use any sort of sexualized motif in describing God. You describe Mama Yoni, my womb, and I'm the seed-giving father, and seed there means semen. It's like, I can't speak about such things in civilized, discourse. So there's that, the Victorian sensibility. And then, and actually, amazingly, Indians nowadays, because of the British Raj, if you look at Indian sculpture and stuff like that, pre-British Raj, you found that it was quite celebratory of the body and sexual motifs. But this Victorian sensibility, and on the other hand, you have this New Age sensibility that anything masculine or feminine that like details God in any way, using those things that we want to get out of and get away from, it's bad. So both groups are going to cringe when you use sex language and sexual motifs to describe the absolute, but I think they're both wrong. And my argument's very simple. You find these motifs existing all over the natural world. And therefore, to understand that this world comes from that world means you have to be able to trace out and tease out and understand some connection between them and find some value in them. Otherwise, this world becomes a huge accident. And that's indicative of a problem in the Creator. Women carry a child. They should be more nurturing. Women lactate. They should be more nurturing. If they weren't, that would be a problem. Men are defenders. They should have the body structure to be able to defend. If they don't, there's a problem. We don't find that male and female bodies are made equally, and that's why you have male and female sports. They had a woman in the Olympics. I think it was in South Africa. She was crushing records. And they thought it must be a guy. And so they subjected her to like a full physical exam. And they tested her. They found out that she had ridiculously high testosterone levels. She was fully a woman, whatever that is, XY chromosome, whatever it is. But she had ridiculously high levels of testosterone. And the result of that single difference was that she was able to crush Olympic records. It gave her a decided advantage across the board. I think the Gita is a brilliant take on this. It freely describes Krishna as a man, as a father, and also freely describes Krishna in feminine terms as a mother. And there's incredible value in looking at both of those things. And so it's good to see things as transcendent and beyond this world and beyond our conceptions of male and female. It's also valuable to see Krishna as the origin of masculinity, the origin of femininity in a pure way, and to see how we've messed things up along the way and how we can get back. In a lot of ways, the third wave of feminism was about a certain group of people saying, hey, I get to choose what it means, and I like these traditional roles. I find them to be more natural. I feel good with them. And so who are you to tell me it's got to be all gender neutral? Okay. So that's one thing I want to discuss. Krishna describes himself as Aham Bija Prada Pita. I am the seed-giving father. Tasmin Garbam Dadamyaham. I give that seed into the womb. That womb which is Mama Yoni, my womb. It's me. Pitaham Asya Jagata. I am the father of the universe. Mata Asya Jagata. I'm the mother of the universe. And so this language isn't sloppy language. It's not unsophisticated language. It's not a language of a previous time. This language was made after God was described in neutered terms. This language was the next layer. It was the next level. It was the next rung in the ladder of climbing up to transcendence. First you have to understand God's not like you. Then you have to understand how God is like you, while still remembering how he's not like you. And so there's incredible value in saying God's nothing like you, nothing like this material world. You're in a temporary body, God's eternal. But then pretty soon you have like God has no form, you can't explain where form came from. God has no personality, you can't explain where personality comes from. God has no freedom, you can't explain where freedom comes from. We have a lot of things which are valuable. As eternal souls, our eternality, our existence, our individuality, our free will. If God doesn't have these things, these are really good things that we have. And if God doesn't have those things, where do those things come from? So anyway, these are some thoughts about sexed language and sexual motifs in our sacred texts and how they don't represent an older train of thought that's been replaced, but rather they came after the neutered language was used, after the apophatic theology, after the via negativa theology, and they represented yet another rung where you took the lessons you learned about God's transcendence and then you saw how this world in a pure way was connected to God and how you could look at this world in a purified way that led you across that bridge from this world to that world, and immanence allowed you to go to transcendence, and this world wasn't merely mammon, it wasn't merely an accident, women weren't merely bad, things in this world weren't merely horrible, but there was actually some method to the madness, and this world became a vehicle through which you could learn valuable lessons and go to that world. All right. I think I made that point. When I think about Father's Day, I was doing it today, I thought about my father. And I was thinking about my father. My father was an architect. And my father was an inventor. And he was extremely creative and artistic. And my father, architecture as a field is kind of unusual in that it combines the rigor of mathematics and engineering with graphic design and invention and art. And so it's an unusual profession in that people have an opportunity to explore their artistic side as well as being, incredibly meticulous from an engineering mathematic perspective, because you have to follow the laws of physics. You have to build something that's physical, that matches up to building codes. And my dad did a bunch of stuff. He retrofitted retired Navy destroyers so they could launch satellites into an aircraft carrier. They could launch satellites into space for satellite companies. He was involved in helping Venezuela to set up its oil fields. He built hospitals for the Shah of Iran before the Ayatollah Khomeini came in the 70s. He was involved in the 1984 Olympics and built a number of venues for the 1984 Olympics. He did a bunch of really avant-garde, far-out stuff with architecture over his long and storied career. He invented the self-cleaning bathroom, where you would just close the door and press a button, and it was almost like a dishwashing machine. So bathrooms could be kept meticulously clean. And I thought, I have no mathematics background to speak of. I didn't even know parentheses and pi. What is it? Parentheses, exponentials, mathematics divisions, PEMDAS. I didn't even know PEMDAS. I had to learn PEMDAS to teach my kid PEMDAS a few days ago for the order of operations for math problems. But I do like to be meticulous about things. And I'm thinking I got that from my dad. And I also like to be creative. Like when I read scripture, and I've applied it to my study of Krishna consciousness, and I see a lot of my father's qualities in me. And so I thought about that, I thought about him. Then I thought about my initiating gurus, the guru who gave me initiation. It was my primary guru, my original guru, the guru who initiated me into the Hare Krishna movement. And I thought about him as a father figure. And I realized that what I looked up to him wasn't things which were manly per se. It wasn't that he had masculine qualities that I valued. I got those from my dad, my birth father, the person who raised me. But from my spiritual father, from my guru, I learned about tolerance and patience and kindness and compassion. Not that my father did not embody those things in some way, but I learned about these qualities in the context of spirituality. And I think those qualities, in a lot of ways, defy gender roles. They're not masculine qualities per se. They're qualities I inherited from my spiritual father because my guru was a male. If my guru was a mother, I would have inherited them. A woman, I would have inherited them from her. I don't see these qualities as being fundamentally linked to masculinity. And so when I look at my guru and the qualities I learned from him and that I'm trying to emulate, I find he has a number of qualities that I need to grow spiritually. It was almost like Krishna put me together with somebody that had everything I lacked. He was, perfectly cultured and incredibly peaceful and very soft-spoken and very respectful. And I learned, and I am learning, a lot of these qualities from him. Totally dedicated to our mission, very selfless in all of his behavior. And so I found that in him I learned these valuable qualities. And I don't think these qualities are I don't think they're the property of men. I think they're the property of spiritualists. And then in addition to having my initiating guru, I also have my instructing gurus, the gurus who have walked me along a spiritual path over the last few decades. And I look at them and I see that the way they live their lives, the selflessness, the depth, the profundity, the love, the devotion that they embody, their radical, just profound love for Krishna, their ability to clarify issues for me and really shine a light on things and make what would normally be such a confusing path just so obvious and clear that, I'm confronted with my own weakness and not with under the guise of confusion. They take away all the confusion. And the inspiration and strength I get from them and looking at them walk the spiritual path and how it creates in me a desire to follow in their footsteps and how I see that it's the only thing worth doing in life. It's the most important thing and it gives me strength to carry on. I don't think those qualities are masculine per se either. I think perseverance is a female quality as much as it's a male quality. In fact, if I had to go with perseverance, I think women in some ways are the most enduring and persevering figures, compared to men, because they care for children. There's that burned up fossil of a woman from Pompeii where she's covering her child. So if lava came, they couldn't escape Pompeii. It's in Italy. They couldn't escape Pompeii. A volcano erupted. Mount Vesuvius erupted thousands of years ago. And so the settlement was just destroyed. The lava came in too quick. And so there's a fossil of a woman, and she's covering her child. So they both burned to death. Obviously, lava engulfed them. But the last thing she thought of doing, as she was going to get burned to death, was to cover her child and protect her child. And so that perseverance, even protection in some ways, I think these qualities also are very, very fine female qualities. And so when I look at my gurus, the qualities I aspire for, my spiritual fathers, they aren't so linked to masculinity per se. Not the worldly masculinity that I got from my dad. They're just like the finest of qualities. You could see them as masculine, you could see them as feminine, but in that way they're transcendent. And in some ways you could say neutered. And I think that's valuable because it means that, when we talk about picking up the cross and following our gurus and learning the lessons, whether your guru is a male or female, and whether you're a male or female, you're really learning the same basic lessons. You're learning spiritual lessons as a soul. And so within that male package, without denying it or pretending it's not there, without pretending that my gurus are not male or female, without having to force myself to look at them as androgynous, which they're not, I can see that a lot of what they're giving is transcendent. And that, again, is what I was talking about. It's like God is transcendent and immanent, and there's value in seeing God in both ways, and both things have value. And so, a day like today, I think about my father and what I got from him, and a lot of that was male qualities, male-centered qualities, and also some just general human stuff. Same with my mom. I got some general human stuff from my mom too, and also some decidedly feminine qualities. And when I look at my gurus, what I got from them, what I look to from them, and what they inspire me with, and kind of how I'm following their footsteps, when I really reflect on it, it's not so much their masculinity which inspires me. Although some of them are in their own right quite masculine. Some of them were wrestlers. Some of them were Marines. Some of them joined the military. Some of them were big, strong, powerful. Externally, they are very masculine. And they have those fine qualities, and I'm happy to receive those things from them as well and see them as also fathers in that sense. But if I really get down to the core of what I'm looking for from them, I got that from my dad. I don't need that again. And so what I'm getting from them is I'm getting these really fine qualities of a devotee. And those qualities are true for men and women. And so whether you're a woman with a male guru or you're a man with a female guru, these same core essential teachings are what we inherit from our teachers. But I don't think to appreciate that you have to deny them their sexuality, their gender roles. And I don't think you have to pretend that that all is one. I think there's room for diversity within that unity, and you can, in some ways, appreciate the transcendence of people more when you're not artificially trying to fit a square peg into a round hole by saying that everything is one in some sort of a catch-all phrase that's unrefined and devoid of any nuance. And so my gurus are fathers, and they're inspirational as fathers. But when I look at why I need them in my life and why I'm inspired by them and why I follow in their footsteps, it's because of their very fine spiritual qualities. And I think about if I was a woman, that wouldn't change. The same qualities are there. The best of them are lessons for the whole world. And I don't think that them being in male bodies obfuscates that. In a lot of ways, it just highlights that they can be fully men and at the same time fully transcendent. They can have joined the Marine Corps, and been surfers, and been wrestlers, and been boxers, and been weightlifters. And at the same time, they're pure spiritualists. And this didn't stop that. Just like if somebody's black, or white, or Mexican, it doesn't stop their spirituality. And they don't have to give that up and renounce that and somehow give themselves like a nice neutered tone, a nice neutered skin complexion. And by thinking in that way, it's almost like you're trying to look for a material quality instead of a spiritual quality. You're trying to look for a material transcendence instead of a spiritual one. And you find people trying to fit that square peg into a round hole and make everybody neutered in one because they lack the ability to go there in a deep way spiritually. And so you get left trying to force it in this world and fitting a square peg into a round hole, and it just doesn't work. And you end up being vexed, like the government of Norway was vexed. They tried for decades to get women to become engineers, and they tried to get men to become nurses, and they couldn't. They gave money, they pushed it in schools, they just couldn't do it. They couldn't figure it out. Why didn't it happen? Because men are more likely to become engineers, because they're better at math, and women are more likely to become nurses, because they're better at bedside manner. And you're always going to have a percentage of the population, 10%, of the women are really into engineering, and 10% of the men are really into nursing. But after 40 years of the Norwegian government trying to make it so it was 50-50, they were still at 90-10 what it was before they started their experiment. It's called the Norwegian gender equity paradox. All right, so those are my thoughts about Father's Day, my fathers in my life, transcendence, immanence, masculinity, transcendence, neutered language in spiritual texts, and gendered language in spiritual texts, the value of both, how the Gita walks that razor's edge. And then the last thing I thought we could get into real quickly was something that I thought of today. Krishna is the mother and father of the universe. But there's this wonderful miracle that happens in the revelation of Krishna. And that's that he becomes a child, the mother and father of the universe, the source of all that exists, the one without a second, the strongest, most powerful genesis of all existence, the substratum of all reality, the foundation of everything. That person's also filled with love. And Krishna, while being this incredibly mighty and powerful force, the force, he's sensitive to love, and that's one of Krishna's opulences. And so there's this amazing phenomenon in our tradition that just has enduringly for the last 30 years inspired me. 32 years it's inspired me. It's that some of Krishna's angels desire to love him as their child. Some of Krishna's angels are filled with a desire to love Krishna as their child. And so the mother and father of the universe becomes a child in order to receive and reciprocate with that love of his angelic devotees. That's a miracle. It's a beautiful revelation in our tradition. It's kind of like Christianity, where Jesus came down to suffer on the cross for all of us, but just a way, for me anyway, a way more beautiful and less violent and macabre version of that. And Krishna came, and without the weird hypostatic union where God's fully male and fully transcendent and fully human, and like it has a body of flesh and blood that dies. Krishna retains enough of his transcendence that it works for me. And now you're left with, I'm not going to get into the hypostatic union, it would take too long, we don't have enough time, but Krishna retains enough of his transcendence that it really works. And you get this beautiful Leela, this beautiful pastime, this beautiful episode in heaven where Krishna's angels want to love him as their child. And that love exists in the absolute, and Krishna becomes a child and allows his devotees to love him parentally. And now he loves them as his parents. And the epitome of this is that Krishna's father says, Krishna, go bring me my shoes. And Krishna's a small baby, and he gets his father's shoes and puts them on his head because they're too heavy for him to carry. So he puts them on his head, like a woman might carry a water pot that's too heavy to carry like this. He puts them on his head, and Krishna carries his father's shoes in. Says, here's your shoes, Father. And so one of our poets, 7 centuries ago, he said, you may worship God as the supreme Brahman, as the neutered source of all existence. You may worship God as an abstract entity, as the goal of the yogi's meditation. But I'm watching Krishna carry his father's shoes on his head, and that's enough for me. That in the same way that to be able to appreciate the masculinity and femininity of transcendence and at the same time hold on to the transcendence, that's the real hat trick. Not to just say it's masculine and feminine in an anthropomorphized way, or it's fully neutered in a totally non-gendered way, but rather to be able to hold on to the value of seeing both things simultaneously. Similarly, to be able to appreciate Krishna. I lost the point I was trying to make. Can you guys help me get it back? Did you space out?
No,
You're killing me. Did you space out?
similar to see Krishna as.
I mean, it's not that. Okay, I'm just going to roll with it. We'll see if it comes to me. In the same way that it's wrong when you just say on one hand it's either an anthropomorphized male or female God and it's like one or the other. And it's the same way it's wrong when you just see God as being gender neutral. And you think that this is automatically bad. And the magic is to be able to appreciate both things. That God is fully transcendent and God's also the source of this masculinity and femininity. And you can see both and hold both in tension simultaneously without sacrificing one or the other. So you're not in this horrible dualism where you can't figure it out and something doesn't fit, but you can actually harmoniously blend it all together. Similarly, we find in Krishna that he's the one without a second. He's the father of everything. And at the same time, he's a child carrying his father's shoes on his head. And so one of our theologians said seeing that combination where the Supreme Lord himself has become as a child in order to exchange love, those two things held together, I don't want anything else than that. And so I have this image in my head. What, you got 5 seconds left?
No, 5 minutes.
Okay. I have this image in my head of Krishna carrying his father's shoes on his head as the Lord of the universe, the one without a second, the origin of all, exchanging love with his devotees in the sweetest and most intimate way. And that's the perfection, where you can understand that that's God and look at what he's doing. That Krishna's transcendent and he's also a person. And you can hold those ideas together, make them work into a coherent theology without just jettisoning the one which today isn't popular. For so many millennia, they jettisoned the idea that God was a woman in Western theology. Nowadays, they've jettisoned the idea that God can be male. Both of them are weak forms of spirituality, of people who are incapable of holding more than one or two things together. Okay, that's it. Questions or comments? You guys can jump in. Looks like there might not be anything. I don't hear anything coming down. If there aren't any questions or comments, we'll call it a day. We're going to go do arti now then. And so we'll do a quick arti. There'll probably be a couple of minutes where we go offline, but then you'll get a chance to see the deities. They look really beautiful today. Thank you guys so very much. Happy Father's Day and Hare Krishna.